Hi, students. How are you doing? Welcome to Naya Sim, and thank you all so much for all the love and support. Hope you all are doing great. You all already know that I have been on literally everybody's all the races. I am trying to bring the people that voted and people that did not vote because I really need to find out and know why the indigenous people, why did they do what they did? Because I need an answer. You can actually, I was able to bring some certain things, how Black people have played major roles and how Black people have really been super active with majority of other people, and nobody comes through for Black people. Who advised them to vote? Like who told them? How did they end up in this mess and situation? Because I feel like they all have been scapegoated because what is all these numbers that I am seeing? So you all woke up and decided that you are going to vote for a colonizer, right? And you all are great. You all are fine with that. Now, let me tell us something. From that polling chart, if every minority groups came out like Black people came through, trust me, all this would have been history. But the fact that minority groups are not even thinking about themselves, or probably are just very selfish, thinking about themselves and not thinking about other people, while you all, Black people, are busy thinking about others. Let's get into.
Now, before I get into what I want to say about the native indigenous population of this country overwhelmingly supporting Donald Trump, allow me to give you a little of my personal history. This picture is from when I was in West Berkeley, California, and we were fighting to preserve indigenous people's sacred and burial sites. At the time in West Berkeley, they were about to violate the West Berkeley Shell Mound when we decided to do this protest. That's my younger hand holding a button that the Sky Protectors had presented me with. And this is one of the few pictures I can share from my time in Minnesota when we were protesting to stop Line 3 by any means necessary. So I want you to imagine how I felt when I saw that the Native American population of this country had overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, a man who has said the following.
Is this you discussing Indian blood? We're going to judge people by whether they have Indian blood, whether they're qualified to run a gaming casino or not?
That probably is me, absolutely. Because I'll tell you what, if you look at some of the reservations that you've approved, you, sir, in your great wisdom have approved, I will tell you right now, they don't look like Indians to me. And they don't look like the Indians. Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me.
And before we move on, I would like to remind you that blood quantum, what Donald Trump is referencing there, as well as the one drop rule, were created to divide people that racist Europeans considered savages.
Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. But you know what? I like you because you are special. You are special people.
At a ceremony where Donald Trump was supposed to be honoring the last of the Navajo code talkers who used their special skill and language to encrypt messages delivered between Allied forces during World War II, he had to stoop and reference one of the most tragic stories in Native American history by referencing a line that he had used referring to Elizabeth Warren. But yet and still, this is a thing. And this is the goddess of the Black Liberation Militant Movement, Angela Davis. And this picture was taken in May of 1973 at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. And this is Orange Lions. The Black Panther movement had joined with the American Indian movement on numerous occasions. But on this day, that was part of the cumulation of the Wounded Knee occupation that took place when AIM seized Wounded Knee in South Dakota for 71 days. Wounded Knee was also the site that on December the 29th, 1890, United States soldiers massacred over 300 members of the Lakota Nation. Law enforcement had formed a barricade around Wounded Knee, and originally they were not going to let Angela Davis through to meet with the American Indian movement. But you know what she did? She stood there on the side of the road until she could. Angela Davis met with Clyde Belcourt of the American Indian movement and told him that militant black revolutionaries stood with the American Indian movement and anything that they needed to let them know. Now, at none of the events I have personally participated in on behalf of the indigenous population of this country have I ever seen Donald Trump. At none of the operations that we engaged in associated with stopping Line 3 did I see one Trump supporter or hear Donald Trump say anything about. And in spite of all that, when it comes down to choosing between a black woman for the highest office of this land and a racist, xenophobic bigot who is the descendant of the same colonizers that tried to wipe out the indigenous population of this country, you all sided with the colonizer. I'll just have to let that sink in for a little while.
64% of indigenous people in America voted for Donald Trump. 64% of indigenous people voted for Donald Trump. If there was any race or ethnic group that I thought that could relate to black people more than any other in this country, it would be indigenous people. While black people were forced to and dragged to this land without consent, without promise, without anything, this land was also taken from you guys. You would think that we would have some sort of understanding here, but nah. The majority of you guys voted for Trump. And I'm not even angry. This is hurt. This is hurt. Because damn. 64% of indigenous people in America voted for Donald Trump.
64% of indigenous folks who could get to the polls voted for Donald Trump. And that's because politicians punished indigenous folks for swinging Arizona in 2020. Hi, my name is Evan. I'm a bioethicist and I specialize in misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories as a threat to public health. I've been on this app doom scrolling like the rest of you, and I understand everybody's upset. As someone who literally every aspect of my life is now in jeopardy in the next 6 months to a year, and I actually don't say that to be dramatic, I actually mean it. My marriage, my part of my family's citizenship, my safety, my health access, my job, all of it is actually imperiled pretty severely. I understand why you're upset. I also understand the impetus of looking at the exit polls and deciding who's easiest to punch down at or towards, because we're upset. But indigenous folks didn't do that. And let me explain. So in 2020, Arizona swung for the Democrats, for Joseph Biden, by about 10,000 votes. And that is because of the turnout that happened, which was a record high in the past decade for indigenous populations. There's 22 recognized tribes in Arizona. That's recognized. That doesn't mean that that's all of them. And one of the more substantial tribes is the Tohono O'odham. I think I'm saying that right, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Population. There's Havasupai, there's Hopi, there's a bunch of other populations as well, but this is one of the more substantial ones. They mainly are found in and around the Sonoran Desert area. They have a farm, they have all sorts of crafts, they have all sorts of businesses. They're a substantial population. So there's two major numbers for how many indigenous folks nationally have the capacity to register to vote. That is, they're over the age of 18. The Biden administration did a census recently, I think in 2022, and came up with 8 million. But the Native American Rights Fund said somewhere around 4 million. Their census was, I think, a couple of years before the Biden administration. So just so you know, those are the two numbers I've seen. Those are the two numbers you'll probably see. Now in 2012, indigenous folks had a turnout in a national election. So this is including both presidential and midterms. In 2012, the turnout was 42%. From 2012, there was a steady downward cycling of about 11% off and on, ping-ponging back and forth, up until 2020. So prior to 2020, in both midterms and presidential elections, it was a downward slope in terms of turnout from 42%, the high at 2012, going down to things like 31%, all the way down to 25% at one point, until 2020. In 2020, there was a 48% turnout. And that's a huge bounce back from the previous election cycle in 2018, which was somewhere around like 38, I believe. Double digits jump to 48% turnout. This had a substantial impact on the 2020 elections in multiple states, but there was no state that it was more apparent and had a huge effect in terms of swinging the whole state than Arizona. But immediately after the 2020 election, Arizona Republicans specifically implemented a rule that you had to show proof of address in order to, on your ID, in order to be able to register or be able to vote. And where this becomes a trick is the fact that most reservations and people who live on reservations do not have a house number. They do not have a specific address that you can deliver things to. And so because of this, a lot of people who live on reservations, specifically indigenous folks, utilize things like P.O. boxes. Now, the Tohono O'odham community could see this for exactly for what it was, and they did end up leveling a lawsuit against this law. And what a judge ultimately decided was, as long as they could describe where they lived relatively on the reservation, as well as show a photo ID, and give other proof of them being who they are and where they lived, that they could vote. But this doesn't mean that that was executed handily across voting locations. It also didn't mean that everybody got the news. And because of this, a lot of people were turned away or had to fill out what was called a provisional ballot. And in the provisional ballot situations, their ballot may or may not be counted at the discretion of someone being able to say this person did or did not show up, or this was enough proof to count their vote. Even with the clarification from the judge relating to this law and people who lived on reservations, this had a huge chilling effect on the turnout for 2022. On top of the fact that one of the biggest issues related to living on reservation space is access. That is literally transportation getting to and from the polls. There are buses sometimes that run once a day, maybe at best. But most people have to obtain some form of transportation by grouping together or by traveling long distances to pick one another up. There's just no polling place within range of where people are, particularly people who do not have a form of transportation of their own. These are things are not in walking distance. There might be one polling place that is open for some distance, that is possibly tens or hundreds of miles. Alongside this were issues relating to the fact that information is very hard to get in and out of reservation spaces, particularly to elders, around candidates, around polling or voting times, dates, locations, and also that these things change on purpose to confuse these communities. And in confusing those communities, they either are dissuaded from voting, or when they do put in the effort to go vote, they're unable to for a myriad of reasons. Either the voting place closed earlier than they thought it would, It opened later. It changed locations. Some of the machines are down. All of these are issues that this population encountered, and this is just describing Arizona. Because of these changes to proof of identity and these intentionally neglectful acts when it came to polling locations and transportation and access, the turnout between 2020 and 2022 plummeted from 48% to 31%. And it plummeted even further in this current election cycle. So if you can imagine, for an incredibly disenfranchised group, the people who were able to, first of all, physically get to their polling location that was in fact open, and they were not questioned, or they were able to show enough proof of identity to vote, you can imagine what kind of privileges they might be living with that might cause them to vote in different decisive ways. On top of the fact that it's not hard to split a vote pretty deeply when you have a low turnout. If 40,000 people show up and 4 of them vote in opposition, that doesn't even register. But if 8 people show up and those same 4 people are able to show up and vote, that's 50%. And so the trick you're seeing in exit polls isn't just a representation of like some sort of split or divide politically. It's actually showing how low those numbers are. Turnout is so low that it's able to cause a pretty divisive looking split amongst the electorate that was able to exercise their right to vote. I understand being so upset that you have to find a boogeyman, and I also understand that because we live in the US and we love Puritanism, we want to find someone to become carceral towards. We want to punish someone for harming us or what feels like harm. I understand the sentiment. But in a lot of these situations, we end up kind of swinging wildly and hitting at people that are so disenfranchised that the numbers can be manipulated in a way that looks like they're fragmenting from solidarity. This is where I'm going to mention Gene as one of the creators that I so deeply appreciate on this app, because he works so hard to get people to understand what our radical politic actually means in practice and praxis. And it means that we have to understand what disenfranchised looks like, and sometimes it looks like something that is being weaponized against us, or that people are fragmenting away from us or mistreating us. Oppression looks like telling people that don't have a house number or a street name because they live on a reservation, that they have to show proof of address to make sure that they get discouraged and don't come back to vote, especially because they had to organize with 3 neighbors in order to even get physically to the location. And that means the most privileged of them are able to exercise that right. And under a capitalist system, the most privileged are going to vote in favor of capitalism at minimum, and in favor of the privilege that they so deeply benefit from. Wanting to dismantle any sort of oppression requires that we look at instances like this and ask ourselves who benefits from us fighting with this group? Who might have been hurt to create these numbers, or how could these have been falsified? And I'm not saying that's what happened in every situation, but if you already know the conditions of an indigenous population, then you should know that there's something else also affecting these things. And it's probably their oppression. Hello, I'm back with more details regarding this, and I'm just using a mutual's comment to tag it into the original video because there's actually been an update very recently as it pertains to Indigenous representation in the exit polling. So Dr. Stephanie Fry, who is the founding director of RISE at Northwestern University, I'll put what that stands for on the screen, actually analyzed the exit polls and found that, first of all, it was a contracted organization that did the exit polling and did the exit polling for a number of media news sites. So every exit poll that you've seen, I think they've vacillated by like 1 or 2 points, but all of them are coming from the same contracted source. And what they ended up doing was there was a number of issues with the data collection, as I intonated in my original video. Number one, they oversampled the South. So 35% of their sampling was in the South, the southern region, not West, not Midwest, and not other areas where there were reservations or other spaces, like further north in the Midwest. Number two, sample size was too small. And I said that in my other video that it's a denominator issue. For those of you who don't know, when we talk about data and we talk about creating percentages, we're talking about data that's being created through the denominator. So again, like the example I gave was, if 4 people out of 40,000 decide something, they voted for something, whatever, it doesn't even make a percentage. But if 4 people out of 8 do, those same 4 people, but you only poll 8 instead of 40,000, your percentage is 50%. That is why in public health, in environmental research and sciences, anything that has mixed methodology, qualitative analysis, or even quantitative analysis, when it comes to polling or data collection, when it comes to people, positive tests, any of those things. This data is used all the time. It's called the denominator rule. And essentially what you're doing is that you have to sample a substantial portion of the population in order to have like fair representation. Even if your sample is supposed to be a sample of, or supposed to be like a general representation. Like, I can't sample 10 people in Philadelphia and say that number, whatever I got, represents all Philadelphians. It's just too small. Philadelphia's got 1 million people in it. But a sample that, say, is 10,000 people might better accurately predict trends amongst Philadelphians. And so the problem here was there was about 239 people that were sampled. Now, there's a lot of people that keep bringing up pretendians. That is not my ministry. That is not my place as someone who's not a community member to talk about. But what I will say is Dr. Stephanie Fry's analysis of these exit poll designs did not include anything about self-identification or that being a large concern. I will say that. She's a researcher. And so I would trust that that would be something she would have indicated in the piece that she wrote about the flaws in these exit polls if she felt like it had a substantial bearing on the numbers presented and provided. And one of the last issues that was a standout, and again, it proved my point in the initial video that this is attached to, is that the largest percentage of people, almost I think like 83%, something like that, that were sampled in the exit polling were urban or suburban dwellers, the more privileged group. They did 0 sampling at polling places on tribal lands. They sampled or did exit polling at 306 polling locations. 0 of them were on tribal lands. And so the number of people who identified as Native or Indigenous also identified as being from urban space or suburban space and not rural living or rural identified. And the last thing that she does, which I think is a really great example, is that she gives an example of a sampling or a polling that she and her researchers had done, that they had talked to 6,400 Indigenous folks from all 50 states and from about 400 different tribes, identified tribes. And so those groups came to, then they got like a statistical analysis of the representation, political ideology representation, and found that 60% of them identified as liberal or even like further left-leaning, like Democratic Socialist. I think the next runner-up was moderate, and then coming in dead last was conservatism. And so there's more at work as it pertains to, number one, why the people that were sampled. Number two, why those people voted for who they voted for. And number three, how this is actually a really skewed representation because it's not an accurate exit polling sample of most of the Indigenous population nationally. It's too many from one region, an overrepresentation of one region, an overrepresentation of one geographic location where a lot of Indigenous folks of varying socioeconomic statuses and ages, etc., are actually living and located. And it was too small a sample size. It's just bad data all the way around. So the exit polls that you're seeing that create those bar graphs, again, multiple, I think 6 different media organizations, large scale media organizations, including like CBC and like MSNBC and a couple of others, all used this same exit polling data from this third party entity. Yeah, so the data's bad. That's the whole point. That's the point of my original video, is the conversation around like other things at play when it comes to oppression and access. But also, this is just a conversation about, like, sociologically speaking and research speaking, it's just bad data. The last thing I'll say here is that data being bad as it pertains to polling or interviewing or sampling indigenous and native folks is to some extent either overtly or covertly intentional. There's actually a full research paper written about this. It's written in relationship to the MMIW movement, and the cross comparative is around, like, the missing case of Gabby Petito. That's like one of the case studies that they use to show the example of how this works. But the concept is called, I think it's like native omission, or omission of, like, native identity. Again, I'll put it on the screen, but the premise is that data and media information and sharing poor data relating to indigenous and native folks is part of indigenous and native erasure, because the bad data means that there is a just poor representation all the way around. And remember, data and research and things like this are what's left when we're like 50 to 100 years in the future and people are trying to get a clear sense of a population, or even as we go along and we try to get a clear sense of a population that we're maybe not engaging with. So collecting bad data affects all kinds of things. It affects, like, distribution of resources. It affects perspective, as we can see what's happening, and it's building things like stigma and ire towards a population when it's the data collection and the third party entities fault. It's not actually representative of indigenous folks and native folks. But that this is done as a harm, as like a colonizer's, like, harm or a harm design, is creating poor data, so that there's sort of it creates a flippancy and like a insignificance to native and indigenous identities. So yeah, the exit polling data is not correct at all. It's literally just bad research, bad data all the way around. Like, they failed the class. I don't know who made them pollsters.
So this is all I got from this video. And what is she trying to say? That the chart we are seeing from there, like, the chart that we saw about on people that voted and are not the same with the indigenous. Is that what she's trying to tell me? I don't think so, because that polling chart that came out, that you can see people that voted red, the percentage, the blue, and all that, that is absolutely correct, right? I am not making excuses for anybody anymore, because a lot of people have proven that you cannot even make excuse for them, because they know what they are doing and they are sure of what they are doing. So no excuses for anybody. Whatever, I am going with the chart that I so if the chart is not correct, so it means black people, that you can see how black people came out all in full. Black men, black women came out all in full, right? We can see part of it. If everybody voted the way black people, if everybody came out the way black people came out, trust me, I don't think we will be looking for a way to cover up some people's, or looking for a way to make research of how indigenous, Latinos, and other people voted for other, someone else. The truth is that they've been scapegoated, and that is their problem, not mine. The fact that majority people do, because sometimes see, there is something I believe in, and it is time people start getting so much interested in politics and history, because both of them work hand in hand. If you look around politics and history, you can actually tell yourself that they both work hand in hand, right? If you are not able to know your history, you definitely will keep making mistakes on the choice of people you vote in, right? And really, sometimes, like these few days, I think today is 4th or 5th day post election and all that, I have already sat down, thought about so many things. I went through blog posts, saw so many people's reaction. The one, now let me tell us something. When it comes to reaction and how people are affected by when something happens, a lot of people are really very sad, so sad. And some people couldn't even handle the hurt. Some could handle the hurt. Some are still in denial. Some are actually not surprised. Some are very disappointed, right? Some are able to move on. Some are not able to move on. And probably because you are able to move on from this, I do not want to see anybody coming out to probably look for a way to talk down on someone that is like, that hasn't moved on, because it is hard to move on. Why is it hard to move on? It is hard to move on because when you look at all these things, like especially minority groups, all the minority groups that voted, right? I don't know how they did it, but they really messed up. When I say they messed up big time. Some people are telling me, why not focus on the white people? We are going to get to them. The truth is that you already know that they are not going to vote blue. Don't you know that? Don't you know that they are not going to vote blue? Right? So you that is minority, what did you do? What was your action, to make sure that you cover up? Or do you or people expect us to come out also? Like black people been screaming this all this, how many months now? They've been screaming this, right? Because they already know how some people operate. They are going to come to your front and let you know that we are going to do this. And then switch off on you. That is how they operate. And I do not expect anything better or anything more tangible from them. And then coming out to put up because what they are trying to put up to black people is a show. And that is deceit, because you all know you are deceiving yourself. You know what you did. You did what you did. You did it intentionally. Not like you don't know what you are doing. It's obvious you all know what you did. That's why majority of them disappeared on TikTok. When I said disappeared, they absolutely disappeared. Because how did they want to face you? How did they want to talk? Man, it is not really adding up. Seeing the fact that nobody is standing with black people. Seeing the fact that it looks like, black people are just fighting on their own. I mean, just go out and fight on your own, because that chart says it all, that you are on your own. You do not have any help. And the earlier some people understand this and start acting on it, the better. Then finally, like I said, I am not going to pressure or tell anybody how to mourn or how to feel bad on how to react on what happened. Then at the same time, I am telling us that we can come together also, look for a way, because what do we have? We have 1 month plus, right, to figure some certain things out. So what are we going to do? How are we going to maneuver some certain things? How do we figure, we have to also figure all this out. I understand that it is hard for some people to let go, but it is all moving forward this time around. And how you move forward is what matters more. So the best I can say is that I hope we all take heart, and I hope you all understand that you are on your own. This is something that you don't need anybody to tell you. And I hope you or we, black people, start getting ready, right, for the future. And also hope you all know Black Friday is coming real soon. Please put back your money in your bag. You are not going out to shop. Put your money in your bag. And moreover, Black Friday is a scam. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.